great podcast, or maybe a semi-good podcast. Claressa Shields-Danielle Perkins. It's happening on Sunday. It's trying its hardest to have me on coverage and be on a flight at the same time. That sounds just so stressful to me trying to be on coverage. What do you think from a historical significance and just from a fight fan significance this fight means in 2025 for Shields and her career?
Claressa Shields is facing is such an unusual problem in that she just has so little challenge left for herself. She's blown through all of the divisions up to this point. She's knocked off all her opponents one by one. The nature of women's boxing, it is a story of, in large part, the nature of women physiology. The talented fighters tend to be smaller. Women in general are smaller than men. So there are fewer heavyweights, light heavyweights, super middleweights, anything really, honestly, much above super welterweight for the women is a desert of talent. I mean, it just happens. Claressa Shields was born larger than the average woman physically, stronger than the average woman physically. And so as she's moved up divisions, there's just less for her to conquer. I congratulate Danielle for taking the fight. Um, it's clear that Claressa's experience and talent, um, you know, there's not much of an even matchup here, but it at least is a fight. It is a chance for her to once again see how she fares as a heavyweight, how she looks. I was very impressed how she looked in her first tilt at heavyweight, because even though she added the weight, and mind you, women's heavyweight is not 200 pounds and up. They're not as big. But with that added weight, my concern was it would slow Shields down quite a bit. It didn't. She handled it very well, and it seemed to finally give her that little extra oomph, that little turbo on her power to achieve a real impressive stoppage. That's one knock that has been against Claressa, is that she isn't a real knockout puncher, the standard that we judge a lot of men's fighters by. So I'm glad to see her give heavyweight another shot. But, she's running out of things to do. And that's not her fault. But she and her promoter, God bless him, Dimitri Salita, is getting very creative and doing what he can for her. But I think that eventually, if she really wants to climb some more mountains, it's going to need to be in mixed martial arts or something else.
What's your level of interest as, and I'll keep saying this generic word, media member for this fight? Like, are you going to be watching live? Are you going to be watching like social media? Or are you going to just, whenever the fight gets to you, it gets to you?
I absolutely will be watching live. I do have an interest in women's boxing. I do think Claressa is a generational talent, and I understand she is a polarizing personality for a lot of people. But Lukey, that's why multiple screens were invented, and I can handle more than one fight at a time.
I also say this about Clarissa, like, yes, she's a tough woman who sometimes has a tough personality, but we have a ton of dudes who also are tough dudes who have tough personalities. And it's not as big of an issue when they're just tough people. But somehow when Clarissa Shields is just doing wild stuff, it seems like she gets a lot more brunt than, say, pick another boxer who does a bunch of outlandish stuff.
Absolutely right. I'm just going to speak from experience in business and in real life. I have been called abrasive more times than I can count for simply saying out loud what I hear my male counterparts saying. There's a different standard, it's a cultural norm that simply exists. We have to acknowledge it. The same thing that comes out of Claressa's mouth, you're very right, come out a lot of male fighters, and we either laugh about it or celebrate it or not. Um, Somebody I mentioned earlier in this discussion, Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant says some truly outrageous stuff, some crazy stuff. He gets in scraps, physical fights. Man, Caleb don't fight if you're not getting paid, but he's dusted it up, outside the ring plenty of times and someone pisses him off. Imagine Claressa doing all that same stuff, right? We see it a completely different way because, her chromosomes and her DNA are female. I, I'll grant some grace to people who have a different grasp, depending on whether they hear it coming from a man or a woman. At this level, I'm just very pleased that we do acknowledge women's boxing at all, professional. Maybe my threshold is really, my expectations are really low, and I'm just glad to see it out there. But there should be some recognition that, that dichotomy exists. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm not going to put a value judgment on it. People can think how they think about their favorite sports personalities. That's the way it goes.
So if you're buying the pay-per-view this weekend, you're going to now have to shift over to my newsletter that I already told you about. Hyperlink is in wherever you're listening to this, because now we're going to do the undercard really quickly, bullet points. But if you're paying for it and you don't know a ton or you know a little bit, this is going to be one of the most comprehensive